At Focus on Liberia, we discuss everything Liberia, from education to politics, arts and culture, entertainment, agriculture, history, religion, family, and technology. Focus on Liberia uncovers and showcases the best of Liberia and shows the world the truth about Liberia. We educate, elevate, and promote all things Liberia. We conduct interviews, panel discussions, debates, and more. Tune in to Focus on Liberia on Facebook and YouTube and be a part of the stories that make up the news.
This is Focus on Liberia, and I am Dennis Jack.
At Focus on Liberia, we discuss everything Liberia, from education to politics, arts and culture, entertainment, agriculture, history, religion, family, and technology. Focus on Liberia uncovers and showcases the best of Liberia and shows the world the truth about Liberia. We educate, elevate, and promote all things Liberia. We conduct interviews, panel discussions, debates, and more. Tune in to Focus on Liberia on Facebook and YouTube and be a part of the stories that make up the news.
This is Focus on Liberia, and I am Dennis Jack.
And I am Asonisie. A pleasant welcome to Focus on Liberia. This is our program, the Liberia History Channel, always presented here by Carl family. I'm hosting today. Please do all that usual favor, share the broadcast with somebody. It is about the history of our nation. There has been a lot of myths about our history. So we have one to look at today, and Carl has done all the research. The topic for today, the myth of the Mulatto Hegemony. This is a very interesting topic, and I think it will interest you too, and you are interested to learn a lot about this piece of our nation's history. Carl, welcome. How you doing?
I'm doing awesome, and it's always my pleasure to be here. I chuckled a little bit when you said I've done all the research. No, I have not, but I've done some. I've done some research, and enough to dispel this myth, or really dismantle it, about there being a mulatto hegemony, as we've been trained to believe about our country. There was a period of time when Liberia was ruled by mulattoes. This is a very false and almost not just a false narrative, but it's a dangerous narrative, right? It's just like the same thing about this narrative of very recent narratives also. But we'll go through and I will explain, what some of that may have stemmed from, and what actually, what if at all there was a mulatto hegemony, or hegemony, whichever pronunciation you want to use, British or American. We are going to talk about what a mulatto is in the first place. This is a word from the 19th century, and really we shouldn't be using it, but it stems from slavery and racism and all kinds of other things. But we're using it in this context because we're talking about history. So I just want to let everyone know this word mulatto is very demeaning and dehumanizing. In many ways, but we are using it in the context of, kind of discussing history. So I just want to get that out of the way, that I don't actually call human beings mulattoes in 2024.
With that, I have a question, Carl. Let us know, sure. When people say mulatto, what is it? What are they talking about before we get into our slides?
So what the word actually means is that you have one European, or what we say white parents, or in one African, or what people would call Black parents. So it means that you're the product of one European parent and one African parent. That's simply it. It's that simple. That you're another derogatory term that was used is half-breed. They use the word breed. Mm-hmm. And again, terms that stem from chattel slavery, where human beings were actually bred. When they say half-breed, it's not an accident. Human beings were actually bred. And in fact, in order to increase the number of slaves in the Caribbean and in North America, what they would do, in South America as well, what it would do is have the Europeans who were slave overseers, or even sometimes the plantation owners themselves or their sons, would impregnate enslaved African people in order to produce more slaves. And then their children would be enslaved. So mulatto, these, what modern people call biracial, I don't even use that term either, but these people were subjected to slavery, just like every other African. And I know a lot of times there's this also this discussion of, the light-skinned people were the house help and the dark-skinned people were in the plantations. Well, I mean, great thinkers like Malcolm X and others use it. The house Negro was mulatto. A lot of field hands were also mulatto. And a lot of people who worked in the house were black like me. I mean, that's where the whole Aunt Jemima and Uncle Sam comes from. Very black, very dark-skinned people who worked in domestic servitude, meaning worked in the house as cooks and butlers and stuff. So it's not a 100% thing, even in America, where racism and race was a highly stratified thing. And it really put out forth every effort to divide darker skinned people from their lighter skinned counterparts, especially after the abolition of slavery. They tried to.
Sorry about that. I want to know, what has been this narrative, for lack of a better word, concerning mulattoes in Liberia? Any particular belief that has been out there in the Liberian society, so to speak, about mulatto, for which this topic is unique for today's presentation?
Sure. So just now that we're getting a little backdrop about mulatto in Liberia, we think that this concept of this stratification of human beings based on skin color, which is the product of slavery and white supremacy, they think somehow this was transplanted to Liberia. Now, I'm not going to say that in places like the Dominican Republic and Argentina and Brazil, they didn't have a situation where they convinced African people that their blackness was some kind of curse and that their children needed to have children with lighter skin or white people in order to lighten the population. This did not happen in Liberia, and it really didn't happen among African Americans, really. You do have some of this stuff where they had like a paper bag test among elite people. If you wanted to join certain sororities or fraternities, you couldn't be so dark. But that's really an imposition, and you really have a lot of light-skinned people in African American culture who were married dark-skinned people. It happened in Liberia as well, right? So this concept was something that they tried to force this upon people, really. And it didn't stick, it didn't work. But in Liberia, people are taught that it did. And that for the first part of the Republic, all of our presidents were mulattoes, and all of the people in power were mulattoes, and clearly this is not true. And we're going to break down why it's not true.
All right. So, folks, we can welcome you enough to today's presentation. And again, the myth of mulatto, or of a mulatto hegemony in Liberia. That is the topic for today's presentation. We have our first slide here. And so what do we see, Yako?
So basically what I want to do is explain before 1822 what was happening, right, in our part of West Africa. There is a family, more than one family, but the Calkers are the most famous of Sierra Leone, which is, all along the Grain Coast here. But the Calkers were a family of Sierra Leone. They're very influential to this day. And that family's patriarch was an Englishman, an English slave trader named Thomas Calker, who married an African woman in the late 1700s. I'm sorry, in the late 1600s, in early 1700s, had a lot of children with her, and the descendants still carry this name Calker in Sierra Leone. So there's this mulatto hegemony, but they're not really mulatto anymore because you have Africans marrying more Africans and they look just like everybody else. But they draw their sense of supremacy from the fact that their ancestor was this English slave trader. And I have a photo here of a very prominent Calker. There's many of them that are who are prominent, ended up being the ones who ruled Banana Plantain Islands, a lot of the areas around Freetown own a lot of property. They themselves were slave traders until the British abolished slavery in 1808. So there's a lot of people who are intermarried with the Calkers. There are people who are Calkers by blood, but it's like a very big thing. Now, Liberia isn't far away from Banana Plantain Islands and all these other areas. John Sterling Mill of Cape Mesurado, if you had to attribute any one person for why the seed was planted at Providence Island that grew into Liberia, it would be a mulatto named John Sterling Mill of Cape Mesurado. And then you had Philippa Hayes and you had King Peter Brumley. Sorry, that's misspelled. It should be Brumley. Brumley. King Peter Brumley of Cape Mesurado. This is the one everyone refers to as Long Peter because he was tall. So the indigenous people who spoke broken English on the coast in 1821, 1822 would refer to him as Long Peter because he was tall. And in our broken vernacular in those days, long meant tall. So you had King Peter Brumley, who was also most likely and described as a sun-tanned mulatto, meaning a darker skin or a burnt mulatto in some cases. And he was possibly the descendant of a British slave trader. But, we have no way of knowing that. But certainly John Stuart Mill and Philippa Hayes were both mulatto themselves. King Peter Brumley, if he had a mulatto parent, he himself was not. But this, again, to just refer to the fact that this concept of English, Portuguese, French, and other slave traders and having children with Africans who continued their business on the coast is a long history. And their children's children would carry on this tradition. So if anything about a mulatto hegemony or hegemony, that's where it would really stem from, is the slave trade before 1822.
Okay.
So now we're going to go ahead, Sonny.
Yeah, no, I was just about to move to the next slide and try to read what is here. You want me to read this now?
Yes. So this is about John Sterling Mill, John S. Mill, as he's commonly called. He was born in, go ahead, Sonny, sorry.
Okay. So let me quickly read this. John S. Mill was born in Africa, Cape Mesurado, of an English father who was a merchant and slave trader at Mesurado and an African mother. When about 12 years of age, he was taken by his father on a West Indian vessel, first to Charleston, South Carolina, and then to Liverpool. He was educated in England. When he had finished his education, he was shipped back to Africa on a Guinean slave ship. His father had acquired some island near Cape Mesurado. The boy was given 4 Guinean slaves and told that was all he could expect. His father, however, gave him introduction to his partner at Mesurado, and young Mill, by his trading activity in goods and slaves, soon acquired a modest future. M.C. Perry, a lieutenant commanding the USS and Cayenne, thank you, at Mesurado. In April of 1820, requested Mill to sound out the native chiefs on the question whether they were willing to cede their territory to the settlers, and Mill succeeded in obtaining their consent. In 1821, Mill helped, how you pronounce the one, Ayres and Stockton in their negotiations for the acquisitions of the territory of Cape Mesurado, and sold to them his own property in Providence as land for a nominal sum. He acted as interpreter and assisted in the purchase of the St. Paul territory. Although always a friend of the settlement of Mesurado, he refused to live there. He was taken to Mesurado a few days before his death in order to receive medical treatment. He died there on July the 24th, 1825.
Yeah. And the township of Millsburg was named after John S. Mill.
Okay. So
Interestingly, go ahead.
go ahead.
I was going to say, interestingly enough, the small islands that he's talking about his father having owned, the
Mhm.
most famous is Perseverance Island, which became called Providence Island,
Yeah.
which his father and other business partners used as a slave market in Barracoon, a holding cell for enslaved Africans. And they did this on this island for a period of roughly 80 years or more. We do have records spanning 80 years of Providence Island being used as a slave market or depot. So John S. Mill being an English subject, and also his father and his father's business partners being Englishmen, the British had control over their subjects. And so when they ended the transatlantic slave trade, they shut down a lot of these slave barracoons along the coast. Providence Island continued to operate even after it was illegal. And so there's Africans who were, British subjects who were arrested for engaging in the slave trade at Providence Island in 1818, 1819. So by the time 1821 comes around, the island had been shut down, no longer operational. So John S. Mill had nothing to do with it. He didn't want to live there because it was filthy. It had these huts that they were using to torture and torment people, keep them held as prisoner until they could be sold. So while he lived on Bushrod Island, Providence Island had been abandoned. So he was happy to just dump it off on ACS, basically. When they came, oh, you can have this island, I own it. And so he was able to just basically just dump it off. And so the first treaty for land acquisition, or a purchase agreement for land between ACS, which is Eli Ayers and Captain Stockton, one working for ACS, the other working for the U.S. government. Captain Stockton was a U.S. naval officer, a U.S. naval captain, and Eli Ayers, who worked for he was a medical doctor, and he worked for the ACS. These two people, on behalf of their employers, which are the U.S. government and ACS, negotiated for Providence Island. If you go to the next slide.
Okay.
And this is again from a mulatto, so-called mulatto, a person who's half African, half European.
Right.
So this is the purchase agreement. This is the first purchase agreement for property at what would become Liberia. So this is the first seed that was sown, and it was a purchase agreement between John S. Mill and Ayers and Stockton.
Okay. Then do we see some witnesses here?
Yeah, so Charles Carey, who was a European, British, William Rogers, and he was also British. So these are two white guys buying land from a half European, half African, and their witnesses are also European. So this idea that indigenous people sold Providence Island is completely wrong. It has no basis in reality. These people that sold, even the witness to the transactions were Europeans. No African Americans were involved, no repatriated people. You had educated African Americans that were not far away that had come on the Elizabeth and the Brig Nautilus, that were not far away in what is now Sierra Leone. None of them were brought along with Ayers and Stockton to negotiate for land at Cape Mesurado. When they signed this agreement for Providence Island, they didn't bring Elijah Johnson with them, who was very educated. He was African American. They didn't bring Lot Carey with them, who was also already, the Brig Nautilus, had already landed at this time. You had Hillary Teague, who wrote our Declaration of Independence. He was very lettered, educated. They didn't bring him along. They didn't bring Daniel Cooker along. They didn't bring any of these great people who had landed on both the Elizabeth and the Nautilus along. So the only mulatto who's involved in this transaction is John S. Mill. And he was born in Africa to an African mother and a European parent.
So you want us to read the contract, the one with the blue background?
Sure, we can read that.
Okay, it reads here, I hereby contract for the consideration of 1 barrel of rum, 1 terrace of tobacco, 1 barrel of bread, 1 barrel of beef, 1 barrel of pork, and 1 piece of trade cloth to give to Captain R.F. Stockton and Eli Arrett, all my rights entitled to the houses situated on the land bought by them on Cape Monserrato, in Wednesday whereof I have hereunto signed my name on this 16th day of December, 1821. 1821, they're talking about right here.
December
So,
16th. Yep.
yeah.
1821. This is signed by John Sterling Mill, who
Yeah.
could read and write, right? He went to school in Liverpool. He was fluent in English, not only speaking, but able to read and write the King's language.
Okay. And
So
also,
the Queen's
yes,
language
signed,
at that time, sorry.
yeah,
Mhm.
no, I was also going to say, and also signed by Charles. Is that correct?
Yeah, Charles carries a witness.
It's a
William
witness.
Rogers is a witness. So they're not signing, they're just witnessing the transaction. So that is legitimate. So this idea also that, that people didn't know anything about selling land. And I mean, they act like Liberia is some island in the middle of the Pacific that's isolated, right? This is a place where people had been, interacting, giving these islands off. Human beings were being sold and bought at Cape Meserado, off of Providence Island, off of Bushrod Island, off of Batha Cove, off of Grand Cayman. All these places were slave barracoons. So these people were not ignorant to giving land to Europeans to do so-called trade. And most of the time, that trade was in human beings. So
And
they were
Cole,
very much aware. Mhm.
exactly. And while we also see yet, I didn't see where they use money, and correct me if I'm wrong, because what they listed here, is that what actually was used to purchase the land?
Yeah.
Okay, because I see.
So he was selling these houses that were on the island. So there were houses on the island. And what were those houses used for? They were used previously to basically as sell for enslaved people.
So that means they had property on the island and it was sold.
Right. So this idea that people went there and built houses, they went there and met houses. And those houses that they met were not occupied, by some ethnic group. These were slave barracoons. These houses that were there to hold people in chains waiting to be sold into slavery. And now that they had been abandoned, he had no use for them. So we're not going to talk too much more about that because this is about really the mulatto hegemony or hegemony and how we're going to bust that whole myth open. So the first thing I wanted to establish is that so-called mulattoes, or people who were half European and half African, have always been on this coast for a long, long, long time. In fact, we have evidence of this even before the first African was sold into slavery, sold into the transatlantic slave trade. You have had Europeans who were doing legitimate trade, meaning trade not in human beings, who were having children with Africans on our coast. So after the slave trade, this increased exponentially. So many of our people who are coastal people, if they do their DNA, they will probably have Portuguese blood, English blood. This is not uncommon. But after a couple of generations, the appearance of being mulatto is erased and you just look like everybody else.
Interesting.
Yes.
All right. That takes us to this slide.
Right. So now the question is, why do we believe that our country, once Liberia is established, we're going to fast forward to 1847, right? We have our first president inaugurated, Joseph Jenkins Roberts. Why do we believe that every president, some people believe that every president until E.J. Roy was mulatto. Some people believe every president until Tubman was mulatto. And we're going to explain why they believe this, even though it is not true. We've only really had 2 mulatto presidents in the entire history of Liberia. I'm going to prove it. In fact, if you go back and watch all of the biographies of the presidents, you'll know that that's correct. But we're here to talk about this today. So Franklin R. Bruns Jr. is probably, if you have to give the responsibility to one person for creating this myth, not intentionally necessarily. I mean, I can't really speak to his intent beyond what he said, but he is responsible for the images that everyone born after 1952 or who started school after 1952, 1951, everyone who came of age during that time, the images that we have of our presidents, we can attribute those images to Franklin R. Bruns Jr. And you can go ahead and read. I wrote a little bit about him here. You can also Google Mr. Bruns. There's a lot of information online about him. He's an American. Go ahead. I can't hear you, Antonio. I'm sorry.
Sorry, I muted myself.
Okay.
Franklin R. Bruns Jr., May 15, 1912 to March 24, 1979. Stamp collectors worldwide still recognize the name Franklin R. Bruns Jr. He was a journalist and speaker with a passion for stamps, equally at ease, writing for both popular and advanced philanthropists. Should that mean philanthropists or what? He devoted
it's a word for people who make stamps.
Okay, who make stamps. Okay. And how do you pronounce that?
I'm sorry?
How do you pronounce that?
It's philatelist. I don't know. Philatelist? I don't care.
We'll leave that. All right.
Philatelist. I can't really pronounce it well.
Yeah,
but basically it's a stamp maker. He's a stamp, and a stamp curator as well, because he used to collect stamps, and stamps were tools of propaganda at this period in history, because this is how you send around the world. When people see the stamps and it's coming from the United States, if it's coming from Great Britain, you get to see a little bit of American culture and receive mail from America. So this is why Bruns gets wielded. I'll let you finish and I'll explain why this is important.
Okay. Equally at ease, writing for both popular and advanced philanthropists, he devoted his entire adult life to educating the public about the instructive value and joy of collecting stamps. Bruns became the Smithsonian's philanthropic curator when Catherine Manning retired in 1951.
Excellent. So President Tubman, we had a Ministry of Post, and we had a Ministry of Post, which is a big deal. In the 1950s, 1940s, 1930s, this was a big deal to have a post office and be able, because this was how you sent correspondence around the world, by ship. So he would receive correspondence from the United States and it would have US presidents on it. Receive correspondence from France and it would have French leaders on it. From England and have royalty and leaders from the British crown on it. And Tubman had this bright idea, well, why can't we have Liberian presidents on our stamps too? Okay. Because you don't see Black people on stamps. In fact, we didn't have Black people on stamps until the early 1990s in the US, when they put, I think Martin Luther King was probably the first one. And so in my lifetime, somewhere in the 90s, there was famous rap songs, most of my heroes don't appear on no stamps. That was a fact, because stamps were meant for, white men. And so this is a tradition. Tubman, being the sovereign head of state, or the head of state of a sovereign nation, he wasn't a sovereign, he wasn't a king, but he was a head of state of a sovereign nation, wanted to see his predecessors and also himself, because he was a little bit of a narcissist. He wanted to see himself on a stamp too. So he's like, hey, since we're doing all of this, we'll go out to the best whatever the word is, the best stamp maker in the world, and we will ask, him, we'll hire him to create a presidential stamp series for Liberia. So very innocent beginnings here. Exactly. Very, very innocent beginnings. This is Tubman wanting to see our people on stamps. If you go to the next slide, I'm going to show you what stamps used to look like before, Liberian stamps looked like before Tubman had the idea. They had no problem putting elephants and birds and antelopes on our stamps, right? Oh, wow. But the idea to put Black men's images on stamps, that did not happen. Except for where you're doing some kind of, exaggerated racist caricature of a native, like in South Africa or somewhere where they, do some exaggerated caricature, but of an African, in his dignity, whether it be a black king or a black president, it was unheard of on a stamp. And you have to remember, this was the primary principal mode of communication, was to mail correspondence. So these stamps had very wide reach. Every time there was a letter of condolences written to a faraway land or any kind of correspondence, it would carry the stamp of the country that's sending it. I want that to be on the back of your mind as you think about Mr. Bruns and his very racist world he came from in the 1950s. There was still Jim Crow. Black people were not allowed to attend school with white children in most of the United States. People couldn't ride or eat in restaurants. I mean, sleep in hotels. Africans who were even performing, people of African descent in America who were performing as great entertainers, they had to enter the back door and exit through the back door. They were not allowed to enter through front door. So this was a very horribly racist time in society. So people looked at African people and their descendants with disdain, right? Mm-hmm. And did not have a lot of respect for the image of African people. We can go to the next slide.
All right. So, okay, and then this. All right, before we get to come on, let me ask a question first. Mm-hmm. So you said that at the time when they started making stamps, it was no problem to have, let's say, the image of a bird, of an animal, representative of Africa. There was no problem at the time. So these were some of the stamps we had at the time?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
All right, I see.
These are some of our historic stamps that were before the presidential series. And you would also have these stamps of, it was okay to show a Native woman weaving something. She's nameless, right? Mm-hmm. She's nameless. This is a cultural thing. This is powerless. So when you mail this off, it's like, oh, look at the nice Native woman. She's talented. She's weaving something. This isn't the same thing as Black power. A Black president represents Black power because now you have a head of state, not just a nice, beautiful Native woman spinning cotton, or even an indigenous king would have represented Black power, right?
So somebody doing some kind of won't carry the person's name at the time.
No, there was no indigenous king on any of our stamps at the time, right? Mm-hmm. You just had, exactly. So this is just a random drawing of a random woman, no identity. She just represents, the culture of Liberia, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with it. Because when this goes to France, they're like, oh, look at this. Look at the nice little Liberian native, right? It's not a big deal. But if she was a queen and you could put Queen Sandamani on this, that would freak people out. It'd be like, what? This is a queen and her name is on the stamp. It was unheard of. So it's much easier to just show somebody doing something. It's just unthreatening. It's acceptable. It's acceptable to the racist world to do that.
So-called these stamps that we see here, they actually existed, correct?
Yes, these are actual stamps. So the one with the beautiful woman weaving the cotton there, spinning cotton, yes. I should say. This is from 1909.
And I see 50 cents.
Yes, so that was how much the postage was. That was a lot of money in 1909. So 50 cents would probably send your mail all the way to the United States by ship.
Interesting. Then we have this one here. Which one is this? Is that money?
So no, this is another stamp. They had no problem putting. They had no problem putting Eli Ayres and Captain Stockton on a stamp. They had no problem, because they don't look like us.
But this stamp was a Liberian stamp, correct?
Right. Again, Ayres and Stockton have relevance to Liberian history. So the historical stamps are carrying actual humans. They're comfortable putting Ayres and Stockton on those stamps.
And on this stamp here, we see the map of Monrovia, 1831.
Yeah, the stamp isn't from 1831, but it's a commemoration of 1831 map. But again, you have another image. Let's go to the next slide.
Yeah, these images are for white people.
They're for the world. They're for the world. Because let me tell you something. During this period of time, even African people were repulsed at the sight of other African people. That's how incredibly brainwashed people were, right? So if you even drew a picture of, let's say you're Christian, you paint a picture of Christ that looks like Indonesia, African people would be the first to condemn it.
Wow.
And that's even true today in a lot of cases. But imagine what the mindset was in 1951.
Right. Right.
Right? I just wanted context of history. When we think about the past, we have to put ourselves in the context of that situation and remember what was happening in the world at that time so we can understand the motives and sentiments behind situations. The way we think today is not how the way people, well, some people still think the way people thought in 1951, but many human beings have evolved to be less racist in their thinking, right? White supremacy is losing credibility. But in 1951, for the majority of people on the planet, this is how they thought of human beings, that there was a totem pole of the human family with people of Europeans on the top and their descendants, and then everyone else in between with Africans at the bottom. This is just how it was, and that's what people accepted that period in history.
And
so
now, go ahead.
Here's a portrait of President Tubman. Now, it looks like him, but you made him look any European. They kind of, made him look handsome. He was handsome, but this isn't exactly what Tubman looked like, right? So this is the first example I've seen of where they drew Tubman, and basically this is the predecessor to filters. This is Tubman made to look, a little different from how he naturally looked.
Mm-hmm.
But they kept him as an African man. They kept his hair texture and everything else. I think it's a very fair portrait of Tubman. But I wanted to point this out, that they knew how to draw African people to look African.
Right.
Tubman being a Gullah Geechee descendant from Savannah, Georgia, right? Gullah Geechee, descendant from Savannah, Georgia. His grandfather on his father's side repatriate, Gullah Geechee man, to Liberia, Maryland. His mother his biological mother who gave birth to him was born in Atlanta, Gullah Geechee ancestry. She is also sent to Maryland in the 1800s. And they have a son who doesn't look anything other than African. So and also Tubman was alive. So it's much harder to distort the image of a living president, right?
Right.
You can go to the next slide.
Yeah, but I see a quote here. I think it meant something, or it means something. That's why you pull it. Let me read it. The independence of nations of individuals is essential to continue peaceful and resourceful existence. Is that a quote for Thomas and what he's trying to convey here?
Yes. What do you think he's trying to convey? I mean, it's obvious to me. I mean, how do you interpret it?
Well, I think he was talking about the individuality of an individual, of a human being, and trying to say African too are individuals, so their existence should be recognized, their individuality or their humanity should be recognized as equal beings to any other person, particularly a European at the time. I think that's the point he was making.
That's exactly his point. And that's very powerful, because that isn't the case. That wasn't the reality of the world he lived in. We always forget that the Liberian presidents were subjected to extreme racial hatred. They won't even use the word bias. Extreme racial hatred. In the 1950s Olympics in Australia, they spat on our Olympians. They marched. They threw eggs and rocks and cursed at them and called them monkeys and told them to go back to Africa in Australia in the same decade. In this same decade, Liberians who went to schools like Tuskegee Institute and other universities, African American universities, when they would step off of these Black campuses, they were spat upon and disrespected. So we have to remember how this world was. To be Black in this decade, in this time period, was not This is pre-civil rights movement. So this quote by Tubman is profound.
It is. It is. And if you read it, you could really tell he was not happy with what was happening at the time. He was advocating that, look, we are human beings too.
Exactly.
We are a sovereign nation too. You know, we may not have what you think you have, but we are people too, and we should be respected. Now we have Daniel Edward Howard.
So before we even talk about Howard, let's talk about why he looks this way.
Okay.
So Bruns accepted the challenge of creating these stamps for Liberian presidents. And he was at the Smithsonian. So he was in DC. He said, oh, we have access to their portraits. I'm going to go and take a look at the president's portraits. And Bruns wrote the most shocking. So I really just learned that he wrote this about a month ago.
Oh, wow.
But he said, because I was always wondering, why did he do this to our presidents? And we had a show, and Dennis and I were speculating because we're like, maybe he was trying to, create this mythology. And it was very simple. He said that he looked at the pictures of the Liberian presidents and they were, I quote, hideous.
Wow.
So he basically thought that our presidents were too ugly to be on stamps. So he took it upon himself to correct what God had made.
Wow.
He took it upon himself to correct what they look like. And when I read that, I froze and I got a knot in my stomach. And I was like, yeah, it makes sense. It was 1951.
Yep.
This guy was like, he opens up these files, he starts seeing these guys' portraits, and he's like, damn it, excuse my language, these are Negroes, It was probably shocking to him. And it challenged everything that he believed. Because if you're going to put these very Black men in all their glory on stamps for the world to see, it is a challenge to white supremacy. This is just a picture of Stephen Allen Benson alone is an image of Black power. The image of James Briggs Payne alone was an image of Black power. Daniel Bashir Warner, Black power, because these were Black men in power. He had to do something to soften the message.
And Carl, I think that two things going on is almost like I get a feeling that two things were going on in his head here. Well, they don't look good enough, right? As you mentioned, all right, to be given the recognition. And then, second of all, the role they are playing. These are people who lack the capacity for self-governance, right? And so how can they be leaders? And then we communicate this leadership that they occupy to the world. And, it would be going against everything that we believe about these people. So I'm going to correct it, make them look white or mulatto, so that it can be believable in my world. I think that's what he was doing.
I don't think it was more about believable, but less offensive.
Okay.
Because what is there to believe? That was the truth.
Okay.
It was less offensive. He didn't want to challenge. You're putting out here very Black men that look like the people who are still sharecropping in places like Texas, which is basically slavery in the 1950s. They're still sharecropping in places like Georgia, which is basically slavery. Right? If you're Black, you better get back. And then you have the nerve to send a stamp of a country of Black men who look like the people who are basically being subjugated in America. Mail coming from Africa with these people on it was going to be a call to action for more Africans to migrate to Liberia, because this is your liberty. This is your look at these presidents.
Yep.
This was powerful. And they did, there was political motivation and also just basic hatred, racial hatred. This is what he did to Daniel Edward Howard. You can go to the next slide. That's Howard, our Bezon guy, our toll guy, our Bassa guy, right? Yeah. So the man of war, the wartime president, and they made him look like he was a Spaniard.
Yeah.
Because this very handsome Bassa man, they say he was not, he was hideous. He was not attractive enough. So they made him look ridiculous. This is what Bruns did to him.
And as a Bassa man, he even looking better than the guy who they try to make him to look like.
My one of my mentors, Dr. Elkati, used to always say, racism makes you stupid. Racism makes people stupid. That's what he used to say all the time. You know, he used to say myth is race is a myth. And it's a political reality. It's a biological fallacy, but it is a political reality. And if you buy into it, it makes you stupid, meaning it prevents you from being able to analyze the world correctly. It puts so much bias in you that you're not even able to process information correctly. So in order, instead of accepting that this brilliant man, who I love to call Toga, Daniel Edward Howard, was this African native, son of native people, was not mulatto. He wanted to draw him to look like this.
And folks listening, the two images you see there, we are talking about one person, Daniel Howard, who served as president of Liberia. He was painted or drawn to look like the person that looked like white on the screen. But this is actually this Bassa man who served as president of Liberia, Daniel Howard. You see red, that looking very handsome, but someone felt that he was not looking good enough. One, two, maybe the role he played was not befitting of him. So if they have to communicate out there that this person serves as president, he has to look at a person who, in their judgment, has the mental capacity to serve in that role. This is 1951 and beyond we're talking about here. Go ahead, Cole. I just wanted to tell our audience.
Yeah, we can go to the next slide.
Okay. Here we are.
So this is how he drew President Russell. I mean, yeah, Alfred Francis Russell was in fact mulatto, right? And it's not too bad, but I think in the drawing, he doesn't look mulatto at all. He just looks like an old white guy, but that's okay. His father was white. So this is Alfred Francis Russell, our second mulatto president, so-called mulatto, what people call biracial today. Alfred Francis Russell was born in Kentucky. His grandmother, his European descendant grandmother, was the richest woman in the state of Kentucky. When Alfred's biological father died, she liberated Alfred, his mother, and all of his black relatives and sent them to Liberia. Everybody died except Alfred. Yep. Very tragic story of President Russell. Everybody, his mother, his auntie, everybody died, but she wanted to get rid of him. You can be free, but you can't be free here. So there's a mulatto person being expelled from the United States to West Africa where he belonged. And Alfred Francis Russell was the most radically anti-European president we've ever had.
Yeah, it's obvious how he attacked that way, giving you experiences.
So Roberts and Russell. And anybody asks, who were our mulatto presidents? Roberts and Russell. So, I mean, this is a picture of President Russell when he was much younger. Maybe when he was older, that way he looked like, I don't know. But he didn't look completely European. You know what I mean? So
right.
I just wanted to share that.
Yeah. And
so the photo, of course, he was much younger than the drawing.
He was our 9th president, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
No, Russell was not our Russell was not our 9th president. Sorry.
I think he was.
You're talking to Roberts and what was his name? So the 9th president was actually Gardner. He was 10.
Gardner, okay.
Like, yeah, because remember Roberts and Payne. So we had Smith, Roberts, Payne, Gardner, and then Russell.
Okay, so now we have Hillary. Rachel.
So he was number 10. Yeah. So this is again, this is the drawing, the stamp. So these were not just on stamps. These pictures were in textbooks, publications that were hanging on walls in government buildings. They were everywhere. So if you open your eyes after 1951, this is what you were told that Hillary Johnson looked like. This is Hillary Richard Wright Johnson, who was named after Hillary Teague, and his father was the great Elijah Johnson. That's what he actually looked like. Now, you could tell that he saw the photograph, said, let me make him look a little less hideous, in his own words. Right. But this guy was not, he didn't look like that. He didn't look Portuguese.
No.
He looked like a black man, right?
Right, as we see there.
And then you see in the drawing, they straighten his hair. The brother had that 4C kinky hair like myself.
Right.
But they turn around and try to make his hair, look like he was from Portugal or Spain.
Yeah, I like that African hair when I was coming up. That was my
so this is the son of the great Elijah Johnson. This is the first presidential candidate in history that was supported by both opposition and ruling party when he was running for office. There was no contest. Everybody wanted him to be president. That's how much of a great man he was.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to show a close up to show that he literally copied the picture. Mm-hmm. See the positioning of the head? He literally copied the picture, decided to still erase his African features to make it more acceptable. Mm-hmm. But because of this, everybody thinks he was mulatto. Mm. Again, mulatto means one European parent, one African parent.
Okay.
They did the same thing to G.W. Gibson. Mm-hmm. G.W. Gibson on a big stamp just looks crazy to me, but hey, that's what they did.
Well, G.W. Gibson, Garrison, Wayman Gibson, he actually appeared on the stamp, correct?
Yeah, this is an actual stamp.
Okay.
And his name was actually Walter. But we if you watch the episode of the History Channel, we deal with him. The W, they were all over the place. Wilmot, they had all kinds of things. The GW is actually, we concluded it was actually Walter.
Walter, okay.
Because if you go back to his school records and everything, they were calling him Walter. The oldest records call him Walter, so we're going to call him Walter. Okay. We'll go to the next slide.
Okay.
So that's what President Gibson actually looked like.
Right.
So his hair wasn't straight at all. Mm-hmm. Just weird. Yeah, he even made them more attractive. I think he made them uglier.
Yeah, by trying to make him.
He was a handsome man, He's standing there with it, but no, they made him look just odd. Let's go to the next slide. We got a lot of these to get through, and we can take callers.
Right. So there he is.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, then.
Now, a lot of Liberians think E.J. Roy was our first black president, yes. Mm-hmm. But even E.J. Roy, they made him look like one Portuguese. For the stamp collection. So this is how he looks in textbooks. And so this is probably why people think Tubman was the first black president, because even E.J. Roy, they made him look funny. That's not what he looked like. If it was what he looked like, no problem. But that's not what the man looked like. This man was not, he was a full-blooded African. Now, our second president, Stephen Allen Benson, was also photographed, and they looked at his photo and decided to make him look like, look at his forehead, for God's sakes, man. He made our president look so crazy. So this is how President Benson appeared on stamps, in textbooks, everywhere, like a mulatto. So people, of course, the mulatto hegemony, all of our first presidents, this is our second president who was described as being black as an ace of spades. He was born in the United States, son of recaptured Africans. First generation born in America, born free, parents born free, repatriated to Liberia with freeborn parents because, again, they were recaptured, meaning liberated from slave ships. Get to Liberia is one of the young people when he got to after he was kidnapped by King Peter Brumley's men. Go watch his biography, but this was an exceptional president. He spoke Dey, he spoke Bassa, he spoke Gola. He kept in touch with his adopted indigenous family until the day he died. They painted this guy to look like, I don't even know if that's a Spaniard or what. Almost looks like a curly hair Scandinavian, like an Irishman or something. Very interesting.
Yeah, the person just wanted him to look any other thing other than black. So I
Yeah,
can't really tell whether European,
yeah.
whether Estonian or what. So
So
okay,
it's really sad. We can go to the next slide.
here we are.
This is supposed to be Daniel Bashir Warner, and he was so black that they couldn't make him look completely European. But again, another president that people think was mulatto, even though people who knew him and wrote about him at the time he was alive described him as a full-blooded African.
Mhm.
This is these are two drawings of President Warner. And let's go to his actual photograph. Go to the next slide. That's
Yeah.
what Warner looked like when he was young. That's an actual photograph of President Warner. I mean, if this doesn't cause outrage, nothing should. Like, what is this? It doesn't even look like him.
Not at all. Way too far from here. And
And then,
see
yeah,
how
man.
handsome this man was as a young black man, and someone thought
They,
that.
it's Sony, this guy could be from Sasstown.
Yeah, I mean, look at my face. Look at the guy. Maybe from a quarter.
Yeah, you put a brother in Sasstown, they will say, hey, go get one boat. They let go cast nets. And they did this, of course, to President Payne. Now, President Payne doesn't even look mulatto. He just looks like he came from Sweden. But this is actually President Payne.
Yeah. So this sketch from 1868.
Now, President Payne was a little bit light-skinned, but he wasn't mulatto.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't have straight hair.
Mm-hmm.
He was a black man. And then this picture of Roberts.
Mm-hmm.
On the left is the stamp. On the right is the portrait. They look exactly the same. He didn't whiten Roberts. Roberts was acceptable because he actually was mulatto.
Mm-hmm.
Imagine Roberts, who was actually, he and Russell were the two actual mulatto presidents. They made Russell blacker than Payne. Made Russell blacker than Benson. Roberts was photographed so much they couldn't do a whole lot to change him, right? So here's another. These are students, teachers, and staff at the Brumley Mission. Now, the Brumley Mission was on Bushrod Island, King Peter's Town. Remember King Peter's Brumley? So this mission was built basically to educate the day young children, and it also repatriated children went to the school. I don't see any mulatto people. This was one of the best schools. This Brumley Mission School at the time. All of these next photos are from the 1800s. So we can go to the next slide.
Okay. Yeah, that's the next slide. Go ahead.
Yeah, and so here we have Mrs. Sharp, and she had a school for girls on the St. Paul River. Very prestigious school. Honestly, no mulatto children in school. So what I tried to do was look at the prestigious schools and see how many mulattoes, if they have all mulatto, schools, and it didn't, I couldn't find that. Did they have all mulatto government officials? Couldn't find it. So from presidents all the way down to students in school, you don't see, they were not really, and here's a picture of Liberia College, which is a predecessor to UL, University of Liberia. You got the faculty sitting here. You have President Gibson. To his left is Arthur Barkley. I'm not aware of the names of the other people. I just know they're two faces, right? And then you've got a lot of dark skin. There's one guy that's kind of light. I don't know if he's actually mulatto. Seated there looks like a mulatto guy. But everybody's together. There's no segregation. It's not all mulatto people sitting and all, dark skinned people standing. Everybody mixed together. There's not even that many mulatto people in Liberia. It didn't seem like there were that many.
No.
Because if you look at the old photographs, you see some, but they're not many to say there was some, hegemony. They were ruling the country. And this is before he became president of Liberia. This is when he was president of Liberia College. And these are instructors, professors, deans, powerful leaders in the school seated with him. I had someone tell me once, oh, they only allowed mulatto people to go to Liberia College initially. That is not true. Go to the next picture. Another picture, same day, if you can make it bigger.
Okay. Let me do it.
So this is the same day. You see President Barkley, you see everybody seated there.
Mm-hmm.
I know it's the same day because they're wearing the same clothes, but this is with younger students. I don't see any distinction between these kids. And in fact, I don't see any of the students that even look like the mulattoes. So the idea that all of the students at the university were mulattoes, they didn't let dark skinned people, is just clearly not true. I mean, unless they went just to distort history and say, oh, all the dark skinned children, y'all count, let's erase the mulatto people. They didn't do that. There's just no basis in it, even from reading primary sources, and actual photos don't lie, right?
Mm-hmm.
Let's go to the next slide. So we have only two. So Roberts and Russell were the only mulatto presidents of Liberia. They're the only presidents in the history of Liberia that had European fathers. They are the only mulatto presidents in Liberian history. So people say, what about Ellen Johnson Sirleaf? Ellen Johnson Sirleaf is not. President Sirleaf is not mulatto. Her mother was mulatto. She's 75% African. Her father is a full-blooded African. Her mother was half Cloud. So these are the only two presidents we had that were actual mulattoes. We can go to the next slide. So these are the Liberian presidents. And Sony, these are all of the ones. So the only president who we do not have an actual photo of is number 9, Anthony William Gardner, who served from 1878 to 1883. The picture we have there of Gardner is the Bruns photo that he drew for the stamp series. So we're still looking for President Gardner's actual photograph. And I would not be surprised if he looked like, Warner. Because the way Bruns, turned these presidents into mulatto people, I really doubt that Gardner looked that way. But I don't have any other photo of him to share. But again, number 1 was Roberts. Then we had Stephen, who was of a European father, Stephen Allen Benson, Daniel Bashir Warner, James Briggs Payne, E.J. Roy. So the first 5 presidents, they were very not mulatto except for Roberts. Now, when E.J. Roy was killed, his vice president, James Kirvin Smith, became president. He's a legitimate president. He's not an interim president. He was a vice president who completed the president's term. So this is why he's not considered an interim president, as some people think. He was a legitimate president of Liberia. Roberts then took over again, Payne again, and then we get to, of course, Anthony William Gardner. We have Russell, who was also replaced Gardner. He was vice president to Gardner and took over. Then we have, of course, one of my favorites, Tilly Richard Wright Johnson, who was our 11th president. We have Joseph James Cheeseman, who was our 12th president. And of course, the radical William David Coleman, who served from 1896 to 1900. G.W. Gibson, the man of God, is president number 14. Our first president who was not a descendant of people born in the United States, Arthur Barkley, born in Barbados. And then our first native president, Daniel Edward Howard, Bassa. And then we have another president who was not a descendant of people born in the United States. And of course, that was Charles B.B. King, descendant of Egbado people, and who went to Liberia via Sierra Leone. We have the nephew of Arthur Barkley, Edwin Barkley, who is our 18th president, number 19, the longest serving president in our history, William V.S. Tubman, and then Number 20, William R. Talbot Jr., who served from 1971 to 1980. We then have Samuel Doe, Charles Gungay Taylor, Moses Bloch, Madam Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, and President, of course, George Manawia, who was our 25th president. And today, of course, our 26th president is Joseph Nemo Boykai. So we've had some very Black presidents. And this is a Black nation. We have not had any white presidents, contrary to what they're teaching our children in school. Every single one of our presidents, if they were to use the criteria of their Blackness to enslave them, from Roberts to Boykai, would have been enslaved in the United States. There's not a single president that we've ever had that was white. Obviously, because the Constitution doesn't allow Europeans to be citizens. So how can you be president if you, I mean, this is what they're teaching our children in school, that we have white presidents and that, you know, and then a mulatto hegemony, and then the Black presidents came after 1980. Some people say with Tubman, some people say with E.J. Roy. Clearly, this is all hogwash. This is what they look like, with the exception of Gardner, who's a question mark, because again, this is a Bruns portrait. We don't know what he was. I don't trust Bruns' portrait about how they actually looked.
Excellent and excellent presentation. Folks, we have opened the phone line. If you wish to participate, just log in out of the Facebook or YouTube live feed. You will see the number. It has been posted multiple times. But I can read it here, and here is the number to call if you want to call to ask a question, or if you just want to make a commentary, just express appreciation for what you just listened to. Dial 605-313-6004, enter the code 791-403#, and again, it's posted in both Facebook and YouTube live feed there for you to participate and call. My question here now is, the topic, as we know, is the myth of the mulatto hegemony. So yeah. I actually want to know what this word hegemony means. It will help us to understand what we're talking about here. So I got a definition that we can use. It says here, the dominance or control exerted by one state or a social group, or it can be an ideology, over others, often through cultural, economic, and military power, and maybe I should add political power. So you, from your presentation here, there was no such thing as any mulatto hegemony where you have a group of light-skinned people that dominated at any point in our nation's history. For those who hold that view, they are like, well, there were light-skinned people in Liberia who are control political power, maybe economic power or governance in Liberia. Your presentation here is saying, no, that didn't happen because there were very few light-skinned people in Liberia who held onto political power.
Very few.
Yeah. So how can you better explain yourself, you know, to prove what your presentation is establishing here, that was actually a myth? Because if you look at the definition I show, maybe it could be just two persons having so much control over the system.
If it's two people having control of the system, who were those two people?
Go ahead.
I mean, that's the question. I don't see the evidence. You're asking me to argue something that there's no evidence of.
Okay. So because
you're saying maybe there were two people. Who were the two people? You're saying maybe, but who were they?
Okay, we have.
I mean, unless you want to argue that Joseph Jenkins Roberts was a mulatto hegemony all by himself, it's still false, because his vice president was Black like me, right? And most of his cabinet officials were Black. Both times he served as president. Are we going to say that the economics were controlled by a mulatto? I mean, yeah, there were some mulatto traders that had money, and there were people like E.J. Roy who were very Black and very rich. People like Stephen Allen Benson. So it means that there's a group of people who see themselves as separate from others, dominating over those others. And I don't see evidence that there was a group of people who saw themselves as separate from others. That even the most so-called mulattoes were marrying recaptured Africans, native people. They were marrying other black people that were blacker than themselves. People were getting intermarried, right? So it just doesn't.
There's no evidence. I just want
Yes, I
to
cannot
ask
argue.
to
I cannot.
have.
I mean,
Yeah,
mhm,
I just want to also have a definition of what the hegemony is, because some
mhm.
people hold the view that, well, at some point there was a mulatto hegemony in Liberia. First, you look at population, or you say the definition is it has to be a group or the state, but that was not the case.
Yeah.
Those on the line, please hold on. We'll get back to you. Please mute yourself.
So
So,
yeah, the people who disagree are the ones we need to call in and have them explain why they believe this and show the evidence of it, not just that they think it because therefore they think it, therefore it is. We're not, that's not how the world works.
yeah, because
Evidence-based
if
conclusions
there were
is what we're
anything called
discussing.
mulatto, then the two mulatto presidents we have, Roberts and Russell,
Russell
no,
was never elected, right? He was the
mhm,
vice president, and when Gardner had to step down because he had a nervous breakdown or a stroke, one of the two, when he lost the Galena territory,
mhm,
almost died on the spot and was no longer able to do anything, heartbroken. Russell
mhm,
then took over. So Russell wasn't even elected.
right. And the
And
government,
for
the two
Russell to even be
individuals
considered
headed,
part of a hegemony of any kind, Russell was probably the most pro-African president in Liberian history,
mhm,
most anti-European president in Liberian history. So Russell, you cannot include in any kind of mulatto hegemony because he didn't even like the fact that if he could have cut himself and drained out all his European blood, he would have done so. That's how
and
radical he was.
and I agree with you, because the two separate government, the two individuals headed, if you look at the cabinet there, they were not even dominated. The cabinet was not predominantly mulatto, so it couldn't be any mulatto.
Exactly.
All right,
And you could
folks,
continue in
go
business
ahead.
and trade, but there were a lot of people who were not mulatto that were very prominent business people. Even in the legislature, everybody was kind of, most people in the legislature were very dark. The
Mhm,
judiciary was very, very black.
mhm.
I don't even, it's just, that's a different, that's a different
Yeah.
conversation. So I
All
don't know where
right.
people coming from with this.
Yeah. All right. All right. Well, folks, you just listen to it there. We are going to go to the phone line now. The presenter of Focus on Liberia History Channel has done, some research to prove that there is a myth about anything called mulatto hegemony in Liberia. She had done her presentation. If you agree, you disagree, you have a comment, you have a question, she's ready. We are now going to the phone line. Let me see who we have there now. We have one person there now who is waiting. Caller, your name and where are you calling us from?
If I'm the one, this is Artemis Gay from Chicago, Illinois.
Oh, Dr. Gay, thank you for joining us. How you doing?
I'm wonderful, wonderful, and I just want to make a comment more than anything. I just want to appreciate Madam Okol for this wonderful topic. And if there's any elevation, she needs to be in Liberia to help that country break these myths and lies about our history. And there's no other better way than to show pictures. And I'm pleased she talked about something very profound in our history. Liberia one time boasted of having the highest amount of women who were educated or in school by these missionaries that were teaching our girls. And those pictures are just so profound. I just want to add that. And I just also want to add that, because you mentioned Russell. Russell had a very peculiar relationship with Abraham Lincoln, because his wife, if you would check the record, was once they had a relationship, very strange relationship, but it's profound in the history. When I go to Springfield, Illinois, and I tell the people about Russell and Abraham Lincoln's wife, and they're like, wow. So these are very good topic points you're raising. My question now to you, Madam Crow, how do we push this beyond just the teaching aspect of our country, to our politicians, to our, I was saying to our student writer, I want to call one person name. He writes this book of my own friend, my own uncle Sam Jackson. When I hear him preach these things in his writings, this mulatto hegemony, how do we break this kind of thing? Because these are people who are educated. and they are out there in the public sphere. So how do we deal with that?
Right. And again, yeah, thanks, Artemis. That was very important to mention our scholars. This is not to take away from the work that they did. It's to build upon it. None of us know everything, right? So we're standing on their shoulders and we're doing deeper research. They opened their eyes seeing these pictures. They didn't know anything about Mr. Bruns and what he did. So if you grow up seeing mulatto Stephen Allen Benson, that's what you believe he looked like. They had no reason to imagine that someone whitens him. So it's understandable that even the best of scholars, the only thing I get confused about is they're seeing the picture, but the description from the time period, I mean, they talked about Stephen Allen Benson being a full-blooded Negro, and sometimes it would say he was black as the ace of spades. I don't know where it didn't click sometimes. So our predecessors should look at that and say, but if they're saying he was black as the ace of spades, why does this picture look like this? That was what clicked for me. I'm reading the descriptions of the people by people who saw them and interacted with them. It didn't match the images. So that's what led me down the road to dig. It's like, wait a minute. They don't, this is not adding up. You have recaptured Africans having children and being under the custodianship of churches, being repatriated along with African-American missionaries on the first two ships, which was the Brig Strong and Brig Nautilus. And we're drawing them as mulattoes. It was just odd. So I don't know. I mean, there's something that happens cognitively with people when something's repeated over and over again. They just can't see the other evidence. When people say, oh, the ship Elizabeth, free blacks, free blacks, free blacks. There's some kind of cognitive issue that happens that no one can really, when you start reading the diary of Daniel Cook, Cooker, other journals, and you start reading, oh, Native Africans on board the ship Elizabeth, what's happening? And you don't make the connection that, hey, it was the United States Agency for recaptured Africans and the ACS. So there's the two organizations sending recaptured Africans back with their African-American custodians is really what they were on the Elizabeth. The educated people on the Elizabeth were the African-Americans. The recaptured Africans is like some of them had learned how to read and write a little bit because they had been in American custody for a while, but they're being sent home with teachers and missionaries. And that myth is missed by so many of our scholars, and it's because of this repetition. Freed slaves. We just think everybody was Black American. It's very interesting. The evidence is there. Mm-hmm. It just isn't processed.
Thank you. Let me read some comments. I see some questions.
Thank you, Artima.
Yeah. Let me read some comments, especially ones that may have questions for you.
Oh, before you do, I'm sorry, I didn't address one of the questions before I forget. And Artemis, I think the work you're doing with your documentary, going to Liberia and things like that, I think that's how people are going to become aware. We have to just keep, reminding Liberian people. I wish LBS would carry interviews with you and your team. I wish LBS would, relay the Liberian History Channel so that this information can get to our young people. I wish that, there'd be a committee, a consortium put together of people to revisit and revive how we write textbooks about our history. A lot of things are just, by ear. I heard it, okay, let's do that history. We have to do better. We have to raise our standards for what we consider to be information and get it right.
And Carl, you are right, because most of the things are myths that we continue to hear. And
I can't hear you, Ansoni. Ansoni, you went. Oh,
I'm back now.
Yeah, I can hear you now. Okay,
Yeah,
go ahead.
am I back now? Okay.
Yes, you are.
Yeah, I was just saying, most of the myths out there, those I think we heard from the mouths of people. So if program like this can be on the radio, when people hear it, that would be a very good way of trying to get rid of the myths out there and get the actual through Liberian history. So, I mean, I'm just agreeing with you that something that they should be on the edge and another way to correct the falsehood and lies and myths that are out there. Let me read this one. What was the percentage of the population of Liberia of the slave descendants? And what is the percentage of the population of the native Liberian descendant in 2020 of the latest census? What a question.
I don't know how that question is relevant to what we're discussing, but what I will say, even, there's very few people, because everybody intermarried, almost everyone, even, President Talbert, whose family were, on both sides were descendants of American Liberians, were also intermarried with Pele people. So, I mean, what is this? Most people, even if you had one ancestor that came on a ship, whether from Barbados or America, the rest of your ancestors were indigenous people. Even if because people went to the same schools and they married their classmates. That's what happened. And the schools were not segregated. So people who claim to be American Liberian is because they have maybe one or two ancestors, but all the rest of their great grandparents are native people. It is just what it is. There was not this segregation. People who went to school, if you were indigenous and you went to school, you became part of an educated class and you got intermarried, right? And if you were, even among the indigenous people, how many people come from one ethnic group? If you go back through 2-3 generations, somebody that thinks they're Cloud today had a Baza grandma or a Grebo grandma, because of just ethnicity is a fluid thing. And I think, people choose to call themselves one ethnic group or another based on the language they spoke when they were born. It doesn't mean that's who all their ancestors were.
All right, that one is from Afra Dennis. Why in African history they never mention Liberian president, especially President William V. S. Tubman, for the good things he did in Africa, but they talk about Ghana, Tanzania, Mandela, and other African past leaders?
Well, the reason is that Liberia, the 1980 coup, removed Liberia from the respectable commentary of world history. What the 1980 coup successfully did was it buried Liberian history. And that movement that supported the coup wanted to erase this Pan-African state, this Pan-African movement from the face of the continent and replace it with buffoonery, which is what was successfully done. We replaced our history with a really buffoonish narrative of a handful of people coming on ships and beating everyone into submission. In this over excessive emphasis on some noble savages that were on the coast that didn't know anything and people just came and beat them, and it's not true. The people on the coast were already speaking English. They were already interacting with Europeans before even there was a transatlantic slave trade. People, it isn't what they painted, but everywhere else in Africa is aware of their history. Liberia is not. And if you yourself as a nation remove yourself from the respectable commentary out of whatever, that's what happens. And no, I don't have the information compiled in a book. I am working on a book about the biography of President Barclay, which will be interesting. And I will let you all know when that's done. President Arthur Barclay. And when I get that done, I will let everyone know. But this podcast that I do is for two reasons. One, I'm sharing information, and I always like to provide sources so that others can dig deeper and write books based on information that they find and verify on their own. And secondly, most of our people don't read. So if you share information in this manner, it's more effective. Writing books is time consuming. If you want me to write a book, sponsor me and I will write a book. If you don't want to pay for me to write a book, don't ask me to write a book. Y'all go raise money so I can leave my job and write books for y'all.
All right. And so our viewers, those who have watched and those who will watch later, this is how we will come to the end of today's edition of the Liberian History Channel, presented by Carl Family. Carl, your final words for us to close.
Yeah, so I just wanted to say, for anyone who's watching, these conversations are important. And I really like what our team has said, because there's very few people that will sit and watch a podcast for an hour and a half, and get all this information. It's important that we engage our government officials, our leaders, and ask them to ensure that information is disseminated to the young people. our history is so important and so rich. It'll build the self-esteem of our country. Part of the reason our self-esteem as a nation is in the gutter is because we don't know who we are. We don't know what we've accomplished. We don't know from where we've come. And we look to other countries that have done less than we have done, with admiration, because we don't know what we're standing on. And so get the message out
we
there.
don't know the kind of great leaders we had.
Exactly. In fact, the opposite. They lie on the people, right? Mm-hmm. Oh, that since 1847, everybody just been corrupt. And since 1847, because that mantra is an excuse to propagate and encourage sub-mediocre conduct and deliverables. If you can condemn everyone of your predecessors, it justifies your lack of accomplishment, your failures as leaders. Every time I hear a Liberian leader say, since 1847, I say, here we go. You got to cuss everybody that came before you to justify your sub-mediocrity. This is not okay. This is one of the reasons I really, really have to say this. President Boakai loves history. When he came here to Georgia, I compiled a history of the relationship between Liberia and the state of Georgia, and I took it to him. And when I gave this to the president, I didn't expect him to, I thought he'd appreciate it. I know he likes to read and he loves history, but he held on to it the entire time we were there and was going through it and reading it and barely listening to the rest of the conversation because he was so intrigued by it and kept telling me, thank you. I was so impressed by that. This is important because history gives us a compass. It lets us know why the world is organized the way it is. It lets us know what happened before we were born to cause the situation that we live in, and it gives us a basis for planning our future. Without history, you don't know your friends from your foes, right? So it's a beautiful thing. But that is one thing I do have to say that I appreciate it. That President Boakai actually, took the little thing I put together seriously. I felt honored by that, and I'll never forget that moment, because there's a lot of times you share information with people that, oh, okay, thank you, and they push it aside, or sometimes they don't even respond. But in this case, it was quite a, it made me feel like everything I'm doing is not for granted. I'm just hoping that some of his officials will look at this and try to, implement some of these things, especially in our K-12 curriculum.
And again, we are playing our part, and you are playing the biggest part here, doing the research, and then we carry on the production, and the video is free. The information is free for people to learn.
It's my gift. It's Tony's gift. It's Dennis Jah's gift. This is our way of giving back. The research we do is very cost intensive. It's time consuming. But everybody has a way of giving back to Liberia. This is my own way, because, that is.
And all we are asking our leaders to do now is, hey, we got the information put together. How do we get it to the people that need it most? The students of today, even the leaders themselves. Can we get on the radio? Can we get it in the schools? Can we have our history teachers take this and put it on in the classroom? Do they even have a projector there to display this thing so that they can listen? That's where we want them to come in. We do this because it is from this. We understand the importance of our nation. This is how we engender nationalism and patriotism in us. If you take your time to just listen to the History Channel for once, you will see that you have a great country. Much, much better country than any other country that you feel today is better than your country, because you see poverty in your country. We have so much. We have offered the world more. There's so much to offer the world again, but we want to know who we are so that we can be in the position to do it again. Yeah. Thank you for watching. This has been the Liberian History. And call anything coming next. What should we expect to come in the next episode?
So the next episode is going to be British crimes against the state, against the Republic of Liberia.
That is the one I've been waiting for. You have to host this one with me. We have to host this one together.
No problem. We can do that next Sunday.
Yeah.
We'll do
Okay.
it next
Yeah.
Sunday.
Okay. So, folks, that's it. Please, we will take leave of you now, and with the song that says, "We are all Liberians." Enjoy the song, and next time we will be here. Bye bye.
We are Liberians. Liberia is our home. Liberian people. Liberia.